Most people are busy, but only a few are truly productive. You see, being busy doesn't mean you're moving forward. It just means you're moving. And sometimes in circles. There was a time when people spent hours just thinking, not scrolling, not rushing, not reacting, just sitting with their thoughts, asking questions like, where am I going? Why am I doing what I'm doing? Is this the right direction? But somewhere along the way, we lost that habit. We replaced reflection with reaction and depth with distraction. We call it progress, but is it really? Because the truth is, we've become a generation drowning in information, yet starving for wisdom. You wake up, grab your phone, check a dozen notifications, answer messages, rush to work, attend meetings, reply to emails, scroll social media, and by night you collapse, exhausted but strangely unfulfilled. You were busy all day, yet you can't point to one meaningful thing you truly accomplished. That's the trap, the illusion of business. We wear it like a badge of honor. I'm busy. Sounds impressive, but it's often just another way of saying, I haven't taken time to think. Because thinking time doesn't look productive. You're sitting quietly, maybe with a notebook, maybe with a cup of coffee, staring into space. From the outside, it looks like nothing's happening. But inside, your life is being designed, your mind is being sharpened, your future is being created. You see, most people spend more time planning their vacation than planning their life. They give hours to meetings about work, but almost no time to meetings with themselves. And that's where success starts to slip away, not because they lack intelligence, but because they lack direction. Thinking time is where you discover the difference between what's urgent and what's important. The urgent screams for your attention, deadlines, messages, notifications. The important whispers, your goals, your purpose, your growth. And unless you pause long enough to listen, the noise of the urgent will drown out the voice of what truly matters. So here's a question worth asking. When was the last time you thought about what you're thinking about? When was the last time you sat quietly, without music, without a phone, without distraction, and simply asked yourself, what's working, what's not, what needs to change? Thinking time is not wasted time. It's the birthplace of strategy, creativity, and clarity. Every great leader, every visionary, every person who ever changed the world, they all had time to think. Because in silence, they found answers. In reflection, they found direction. We live in a culture that worships activity, but activity without purpose is just movement without meaning. You can run fast in the wrong direction, and you'll still end up lost. But 1 hour of clear thinking can save you years of aimless doing. Success isn't about how many things you can do in a day. It's about how well you can think about what you're doing. When you stop chasing every little task and start asking, is this worth my time? That's when your life begins to change. So take back your thinking time. Guard it like treasure. Turn off your phone, step away from the noise, and spend an hour alone with your thoughts. Ask better questions. Reflect on your results. Design your next move. Because you can't build a meaningful life by accident. You build it by thought, by awareness, by strategy, by deliberate design. And when you finally reclaim the lost art of thinking time, you'll realize something powerful. You were never too busy to succeed. You were just too distracted to think. Most people today confuse movement with progress. They wake up early, rush through their routines, answer messages, check emails, attend meetings, handle calls, rush from one thing to the next, and end the day feeling exhausted yet strangely unfulfilled. They tell themselves they're working hard, but deep down, there's a quiet voice whispering, am I really moving forward? That question rarely gets answered because there's never time to think about it. The truth is, we've become so busy doing that we've forgotten the power of thinking. The lost art of thinking time is what separates the ones who drift from the ones who design. It's what allows a person to move from chaos to clarity, from activity to achievement. But it's disappearing, and the cost is high. You can always tell when someone hasn't taken time to think. Their days look full, but their results look thin. They jump from one task to another, doing things that keep them busy, but not better. They're constantly reacting to what's happening instead of creating what they want to happen. It's like driving fast, but not knowing where the road leads. The problem isn't effort, it's direction. Without thinking time, you trade purpose for pressure. You get caught in a cycle of doing more, achieving less, and feeling like you can't stop, because if you stop, everything might fall apart. But it's in stopping that everything starts to come together. Thinking time is not some fancy luxury. It's the foundation of all progress. It's where your mind organizes the noise, filters the unnecessary, and finds the clarity that action alone can't give. The greatest breakthroughs often come in moments of silence, when you step away from the rush long enough to see your own life from a distance. You start asking questions like, what am I really trying to build? What's working and what isn't? What's keeping me busy but not effective? The answers to those questions can redirect your entire destiny, but they don't come when you're buried under constant motion. They come when you dare to be still. Most people don't fear failure, they fear stillness. Because when you stop, you have to face yourself. You have to look at the results of your actions, the patterns you've been repeating, and the choices you've been avoiding. It's easier to stay busy. It feels safer. But safety isn't success. Comfort isn't growth. A mind that never stops to think will eventually stop producing anything meaningful. The greatest danger of being busy is that you can look productive while slowly losing your way. We live in an age of constant stimulation. Every quiet moment is filled with noise. The average person can't sit alone for 5 minutes without reaching for a phone. But that's exactly where thinking time begins. In the moments when you resist the urge to fill the silence. Great ideas rarely come when your attention is scattered. They appear in stillness when your mind has space to breathe. The brain is like a muscle. It grows stronger in moments of rest and reflection, not constant strain. There's a difference between being busy and being effective. Business is fueled by urgency, effectiveness by clarity. Urgency says, do it now. Clarity asks, should it even be done? Without clarity, you can spend a lifetime climbing ladders only to realize they were leaning against the wrong walls. Thinking time helps you choose the right walls. It reminds you that direction is more important than speed. 1 hour of focused thought can save you years of misdirected work. But most people never give themselves that hour. They think they don't have time to think, when in truth, they don't have time not to. You can't manage life by accident. You must design it. And design comes from deliberate thought. The people who rise to the top of their fields aren't always the smartest or the most talented. They're the ones who make time to think. They don't just react to what happens. They shape what happens next. They think before they act, reflect before they repeat, and question before they commit. They understand that thinking is working. Just because it doesn't look like activity doesn't mean it isn't productivity. Imagine 2 people working side by side. One moves fast, jumping from one task to another, proud of their speed. The other pauses often, takes notes, reviews progress, and makes adjustments. At first glance, the first person seems more productive. But over time, the second person achieves more, grows faster, and makes fewer mistakes. Why? Because they thought before they acted. They used their mind as their greatest tool, instead of letting it become their greatest distraction. Thinking time isn't just about solving problems. It's about understanding yourself. It's where you identify your priorities, reconnect with your values, and realign with your vision. It's where you remember why you started and whether what you're chasing still matters. Too many people wake up one day successful in the world's eyes, but empty in their own. They achieved the goals they never stopped to question. That's what happens when you work harder than you think. To reclaim thinking time, you have to be intentional. Schedule it like a meeting with your future self. Set aside an hour each week to sit quietly with your thoughts. No distractions, no devices, just you and your mind. Ask yourself questions that challenge your comfort. What did I learn this week? Where did I waste energy? What's the one thing that would make everything else easier if I focused on it. Write the answers down. Thinking is powerful, but thinking on paper is transformational. It turns ideas into action, confusion into clarity, and goals into plans. In those moments of reflection, you'll notice something shift. The noise begins to fade. The pressure begins to lift. Your mind begins to connect dots you couldn't see before. Problems that seemed complicated start revealing simple solutions, because your brain, when given space, becomes your best advisor. It's not that you didn't have the answers before, it's that you were too busy to hear them. Every day you skip thinking time, you trade wisdom for repetition. You end up doing the same things in the same way, expecting different results. But when you think, you evolve, you learn, you refine. You stop running from task to task and start choosing what truly matters. You stop being a victim of your schedule and become the author of your life. The world rewards those who act, but it elevates those who think before they act. Because action without thought leads to movement, but thought before action leads to progress. The difference between average and exceptional isn't effort, it's insight. And insight only comes to those who take time to think. So when you find yourself overwhelmed, buried under deadlines, chasing things that never seem to end, pause. Step back. Create space to think. Because the moment you start thinking clearly again, the noise begins to make sense, the chaos begins to organize, and your life starts to move from motion to meaning. People often mistake movement for achievement. They believe that as long as they are busy, they must be making progress. But business is not a badge of honor, it's a warning sign. It means you've filled your life with activity, but not necessarily productivity. The truth is, business has become the new form of laziness. It's the kind of laziness that hides behind full schedules and endless tasks, convincing you that you're accomplishing something when all you're really doing is avoiding the real work. The thinking, the planning, the designing of your life. It's easier to stay busy than it is to stop and reflect, to ask the difficult questions that might require you to change direction or admit that something isn't working. There's a reason why so many people stay stuck at the same level for years. They're constantly in motion, but their motion lacks purpose. They respond to emails, attend meetings, check notifications, and handle the same problems over and over. They work harder every day, but never seem to get ahead. The problem isn't effort. The problem is misdirected effort. When you're too busy to think, you stop making decisions based on vision and start making them based on urgency. Every day becomes about surviving, not building. You start living in reaction to your circumstances instead of creating the circumstances you want. Business is a comfortable trap. It makes you feel important. You get to say, "I'm so busy," and people nod with respect. But deep down, there's a quiet sense of emptiness. Because you know that most of what fills your days isn't truly meaningful. You've confused being needed with being effective. The busier you are, the less time you have to step back and see if you're even on the right path. That's how entire careers, even entire lives, are spent chasing things that don't matter. Real success doesn't come from how much you do, it comes from how well you choose what to do. But choosing requires time to think, to analyze, to say no to the wrong things, so you can say yes to the right ones. The person who never takes time to think is the person who will always be controlled by what's urgent instead of what's important. Urgent things scream, important things whisper. And if you're too busy to hear the whispers, you'll spend your life reacting to noise. Business also gives the illusion of control. When you're constantly doing, you feel like you're managing life. But control without clarity is just chaos disguised as productivity. You can control your schedule, but that doesn't mean you're controlling your direction. It's possible to spend every minute of the day doing something and still be standing in the same place a year later. That's the tragedy of business. It keeps you from growth while convincing you that you're growing. When you look closely, business is not about productivity, it's about avoidance. It's the avoidance of stillness, the avoidance of reflection, the avoidance of uncomfortable truth. Because when you slow down, you have to face yourself. You have to confront the fact that some of what you've been doing isn't working. You have to face the reality that your habits, your goals, your efforts may not be aligned with your potential. That's not easy to do, so people stay busy instead. They fill every minute to keep from thinking because thinking requires honesty. It requires courage. But thinking time is where transformation begins. It's where you break free from the habits of reaction and step into intentional living. It's in those quiet moments that you realize business is not progress. It's resistance. Resistance to awareness, resistance to growth, resistance to change. The great irony is that the people who claim they're too busy to think are often the ones who need thinking time the most. They're the ones running hardest, but getting nowhere new. It takes courage to stop. It takes strength to say, I need to step back and think. The world praises constant motion, but very few praise reflection. Yet reflection is what gives meaning to motion. A mind that never pauses to think becomes a servant to its own habits. You start doing things not because they matter, but because they've always been done. You answer messages, attend meetings, handle tasks, and never ask, why am I doing this? That single question can change everything, but you can't ask it when your life is full of noise. Business also kills creativity. When your mind is constantly occupied, there's no room for new ideas to enter. The best ideas rarely come during work. They come in silence, during walks, in moments of stillness, when your mind is free from clutter. That's when you connect dots, solve problems, and see patterns you couldn't see before. But when every minute is filled with noise, your creativity suffocates. You can't innovate when your mind is exhausted from endless motion. When you study those who've achieved great things, you find they weren't just workers. They were thinkers. They valued time alone, time to reflect, to plan, to imagine. They knew that success doesn't come from endless doing, but from thoughtful doing. They worked with purpose, not just with effort. They weren't afraid of silence because they understood that silence sharpens thought. They didn't let business become a shield from awareness. They used solitude to see clearly. Business also creates a dangerous emotional pattern. It gives you small bursts of accomplishment, a sense of progress every time you complete a task. But that progress is deceptive. It's short-lived. You feel productive for the moment, but soon after, you feel anxious again, searching for the next thing to do. That's how business becomes addictive. It's like constantly refreshing your inbox for validation. You mistake activity for significance. You feel useful, but you're not necessarily valuable. True value doesn't come from how many things you can do. It comes from how wisely you can think. Breaking free from business requires a mental shift. You have to stop measuring your worth by how full your schedule is. You have to start measuring it by how clear your direction is. The question isn't, how much did I do today? The question is, did what I do today move me closer to who I want to become? That's a question that only thinking time can answer. Because when you think deeply, you start to see the difference between effort that matters and effort that merely fills the day. People say they don't have time to think, but that's not true. Everyone has the same 24 hours. The real issue is priority. Thinking time doesn't compete with your work. It multiplies its value. It helps you make better decisions, avoid costly mistakes, and see opportunities you'd otherwise miss. 1 hour of reflection can save you 10 hours of wasted effort. But that only happens when you treat thinking as a necessity, not a luxury. If you ever feel like you're spinning your wheels, if you ever feel like your days are full, but your life is stuck, that's your signal to pause. Not because you're weak or lazy, but because your mind needs space to realign. Clarity doesn't appear in the middle of chaos. It appears in the moments of calm. You can't see your reflection in moving water. You must be still. The same rule applies to your life. Stillness reveals what motion hides. Every truly productive person has learned that busyness is the enemy of excellence. Excellence requires intention. It requires awareness. It requires moments of solitude where you step back from the noise and look at the big picture. When you take that time, you begin to realize how much of what you used to call important was simply distraction. You begin to understand that the purpose of thinking is not to slow you down, but to help you move faster in the right direction. The world doesn't reward the busiest. It rewards the most effective. The difference between the two is thinking time. And the moment you reclaim that time, you stop being a victim of busyness and start becoming the architect of your success. In a world that glorifies constant motion, solitude has become almost foreign. People fear being alone with their own thoughts because silence feels uncomfortable. The moment things get quiet, they reach for a phone, a screen, a distraction, anything to fill the gap. But solitude is not emptiness, it is space. It's the space where understanding begins, where ideas are born, where clarity returns. Success requires intentional solitude, moments when you stop doing and start designing. Because in the stillness, you can finally hear the things that the noise of life keeps you from hearing. When you step away from the crowd, you start to see the patterns that run your life. You begin to notice how much of what you do every day is simply repetition. The same routines, the same responses, the same distractions. Solitude interrupts the autopilot. It's where awareness begins to grow. It's where you look at your results with honesty and ask, is this really who I want to become? You can't do that when you're surrounded by noise and motion. The constant activity of life blinds you to its direction. Intentional solitude is how you step back far enough to see the whole picture. Many people think solitude is loneliness, but they couldn't be more wrong. Loneliness is when you're disconnected from others. Solitude is when you reconnect with yourself. It's where you rediscover your own voice after the world has shouted over it for too long. It's where your thoughts stop running and start organizing themselves. The greatest leaders, thinkers, and creators in history all valued time alone. They understood that wisdom grows in quiet places. They sought solitude not as escape, but as strategy. The truth is, most people are never really alone anymore. They are always plugged in, always accessible, always distracted. Even their quiet moments are filled with noise, music, podcasts, notifications, conversations. The mind never rests, never resets. But when you learn to disconnect intentionally, even for a short while, something powerful happens. The noise begins to fade, and clarity takes its place. Your thoughts, once tangled and scattered, start to align. You begin to understand what you truly want, what truly matters, and what can finally be let go. Solitude is not about isolation, it's about preparation. It's the place where strength is built before it's shown, where decisions are made before they're announced, where ideas are shaped before they're shared. The world sees the performance, but solitude is where the rehearsal happens. It's where you face your doubts, confront your fears, and organize your purpose. Without it, you end up performing someone else's script. You end up busy living a version of success that isn't even yours. There's a deep kind of confidence that only comes from being comfortable in solitude. It's the confidence of someone who knows who they are, even when no one's watching. When you spend time alone, you begin to realize that your value doesn't depend on constant validation. You don't need to prove your worth by being everywhere or doing everything. You start to appreciate that sometimes the most productive thing you can do is step away and think. The world measures productivity by how much you do. Solitude teaches you to measure it by how well you think. Intentional solitude also sharpens awareness. When you quiet the world around you, your mind becomes sensitive again. You start noticing the details, the tone in your conversations, the emotions behind your actions, the motives behind your decisions. You begin to see patterns in your life that were invisible in the noise. You realize how often you've said yes when you should have said no, how often you've been chasing approval instead of purpose. Those realizations don't come in crowds. They come in quiet rooms, in long walks, in early mornings or late nights when it's just you and your thoughts. The discipline of solitude is difficult at first. Your mind will resist it. It will reach for something to fill the silence because silence forces awareness, and awareness can be uncomfortable. But that discomfort is where growth begins. The mind, when given silence, starts to speak truths you've ignored. It reminds you of what you've neglected, what you've postponed, and what you've outgrown. It shows you where you've been busy avoiding yourself. And once you face those truths, you begin to regain control of your life. In solitude, ideas become clearer, priorities become sharper, and decisions become easier. When you're constantly surrounded by opinions, your thoughts are influenced by them. But when you're alone, your thoughts belong entirely to you. That's where originality lies. That's where creativity thrives. You can't hear your inner voice when it's competing with 1,000 others. You have to step away long enough to recognize its tone again. That voice will tell you what's right for you, not what's popular, not what's easy, but what's true. Every person who wants to grow must learn to schedule solitude like an appointment. It doesn't have to be long. Even 15 minutes of quiet reflection can change the course of your day. Right? Think walk, or simply sit in stillness. The point isn't to escape the world. It's to re-enter it with clarity. Solitude refuels your energy, refreshes your mind, and renews your focus. Without it, your life becomes a constant reaction to everything around you. With it, your life becomes a deliberate creation. Solitude is also where you rediscover gratitude. When you slow down, you begin to notice small blessings that busyness blinds you to. The warmth of sunlight, the sound of silence, the satisfaction of breathing deeply. Gratitude and reflection grow together. When you take time to think, you remember how far you've come. You stop measuring your progress by comparison and start appreciating it by perspective. You start realizing that success isn't just about doing more. It's about being more aware. In solitude, you also build emotional strength. The person who can sit quietly with their own thoughts can handle almost anything. Because when you learn to be alone, you stop depending on the world to fill your emptiness. You start drawing strength from within. That kind of independence can't be faked. It gives you calm in chaos, patience under pressure, and resilience when things fall apart. It's the foundation of true self-mastery. Without solitude, success becomes fragile. You might achieve goals, but you'll lack grounding. You might gain recognition, but you'll lose connection with yourself. Many people rise quickly because they work hard, but they fall just as quickly because they never stop to think. They built momentum without meaning. They created speed without strategy. Solitude prevents that. It gives you perspective before success, so you can handle both failure and victory with balance. When you learn to value solitude, your relationship with time changes. You stop seeing silence as wasted minutes and start seeing it as an investment. You start treating your mind like fertile soil. It needs rest to produce. You realize that the best ideas don't come from constant effort, but from intentional pauses. Just like the soil can't yield crops without seasons of stillness, the mind can't yield wisdom without moments of rest. Intentional solitude is a discipline of leaders, thinkers, and creators, but it's available to everyone. It requires no money, no permission, no equipment, only willingness. The willingness to disconnect from noise, to sit with your thoughts, to listen to your inner dialogue without judgment. That's where self-awareness is born, and with it, the ability to design a life that's truly your own. In a world obsessed with connection, solitude is your greatest advantage. It gives you what noise never can: clarity, focus, peace, and direction. It's not about escaping from life. It's about stepping away just long enough to see it clearly again. And when you do, every decision becomes sharper, every goal becomes clearer, and every action begins to flow from purpose rather than pressure.